Illinois' unfunded pension liability, $140 billion. That's money taxpayers owe into the system for promises made from Tier 1 and Tier 2 pensions. And what are those different categories? Well, with the growing cost of the taxpayer portion of pensions for public sector retirees, they had to make some changes. Things were getting out of control, and in 2010, they passed legislation to enact a Tier 2 with fewer benefits. That went into effect for employees hired after 2011 for public sector positions. This isn't just state government. This is also for, say, your local firefighters, your local police officers, your local clerks, or various secretaries and whatnot. Teachers as well. So this Tier 2, a lot of problems being reported about it. Everything from not having enough benefits to attract new employees to the public sector. That's one complaint you hear from unions. Unions opposed Tier 2, but it did pass pretty quick. But regardless, the idea was to try to save taxpayers' dollars. But now it's being shown to have some problems when it comes to complying with Social Security's safe harbor provision, which, if you want to get into the technicalities of all of that, we could. But ultimately, it's about whether or not individuals getting a pension meet certain Social Security standards. And that's something that apparently people are finding Tier 2 does not allow for. So there was a substantial amount of people at the Capitol yesterday promoting a change to Tier 2, fix Tier 2, they said. But Governor J.B. Pritzker, he was asked about this yesterday as part of his news conference. We'll hear what he had to say. But the guy who signed the Tier 2 law into effect, former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn, he was at the Capitol earlier this week for an unrelated event, but he was asked about the pension situation with Tier 2 and if anything needs to change on that.
Well, I signed the bill for pension reform. It was in 2010. It was an election year. I felt it was necessary. It had bipartisan support. I do think, it may need some tweaking to make sure it complies with the federal law regarding Social Security. And I'm all for any kind of tweaking that's necessary. But by and large, that has produced a great deal of savings for Illinois taxpayers, that pension reform for the taxpayers. And I think that's what our goal should be, what's best for them.
So obviously, he says that it has saved taxpayers money. There does need to be some kind of fix. What is that fix going to be exactly? A bill did drop this week to bring about some changes, and Governor Pritzker asked about this and whether or not it's going to happen and when it's going to happen.
Well, it's a little unclear. I mean, the fact is that what we need to do is make sure that we're meeting the Social Security safe harbor minimum, right? So that's something that hasn't been fully calculated. There was one estimate that was done a year plus ago. But we need to figure that out, and that's something, of course, that would be paid over time. So it's not something that needs to get done exactly in the next session. But it's clear that it needs to be dealt with, because otherwise you created a whole other liability for the state.
So again, the liabilities for the state, $140 billion. That does not include the taxpayer subsidized health care that retirees get. That could be 20, 30, 40, $50 billion of unfunded liability. Bringing the grand total up to around $200 billion of unfunded liability, and some bond rating houses have even estimated Illinois' unfunded liability altogether is like $300 billion. Now, it costs Illinois taxpayers about $10 billion each year just to try to make good on what's owed, but there's a lot of complaints about that not being enough money, and ultimately you've got people saying that there needs to be changes in the state constitution to get rid of the pension protection clause in the state constitution. The popularity of that unknown, because not even a non-binding resolution is expected to make it on the ballot, asking voters if that's what we need to do, because that could possibly lead to some changes on local governments, shoring up their costs and such. So clearly a lot's needed to be said about what's going on with the taxpayer cost for public sector retirees. Now, Tier 1, driving a lot of this unfunded cost, is the 3% compounded annual increase of a person's pension. Despite whatever inflation may be, 3% compounded, and that can really add up really quick, especially if people are retiring at 55, 56, 57, even 65, 64 or whatever, being able to live longer. And there's been options to buy out certain pensioners. There's been money set aside to try to do that, to save money in the long run. And then you have the tier 2, which had lesser benefits. So clearly, lots to be said about all of this. But what's the estimated taxpayer cost of fixing tier 2? Governor Pritzker, he says it could be around $5 billion.
It was in the news. You can look it up. I think it was $5 billion. I think, but again, it's something that would be strung out over a number of years, right? Because we'd have to pay into the system as we do now over those many years. Again, it's just to deal with the Social Security safe harbor issue.
So Republican House leader Tony McCombie, state representative from Savannah, she was asked about this with a lot of people on the grounds yesterday, talking about fixing tier 2 and the cost. When's it going to happen? Here's some responses to those questions.
Well, we haven't really dug into the bill yet, but the estimated cost, we just saw the governor talk about today that it was going to be, I believe, $5 billion for just the safe harbor fix. So our caucus certainly supports a safe harbor fix. It's just going to be the devil in the details on that.
When do you think it could happen?
Well, the bill just dropped, so I'm guessing certainly in the 104. I don't really anticipate in lame duck, but you'd have to ask the speaker about that. He keeps the schedule.
So clearly unclear what could pass, what could get Republican support. When they were talking about this months ago during spring session, I think it was State Representative Blaine Wilhauer who said, listen, the fix here to match the Social Security safe harbor is to evaluate each person that's going to retire and set aside X dollars plus one to get them to the safe harbor provision. Instead of just changing tier 2 altogether and increasing benefits, why not just focus on it, on an individual basis to do X plus 1 to get them to match that safe harbor. So what's going to happen here? Obviously, it's going to be some time before anything does pop, but we'll be watching it. Get the latest details at thecentersquare.com. Wake up with us with Illinois in Focus Daily and get the podcast anywhere you get podcasts. Just search Illinois in Focus Daily.